Section 53 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Section 53, Chapter 34, Part 2. They were arrived by this time at the physician's house, and were received by an old woman, whose appearance fully justified her master's description. She provided for Inglesant's wants, and prepared a bed for him, and he sank into an uneasy, restless sleep. The night was stiflingly hot. Suppressed cries and groans broke the stillness, and the distant chanting of monks was heard at intervals. Soon after midnight, the churches were again crowded. Mass was said, and thousands received the sacrament with despairing faith. The physician came into Inglesant's room early in the morning. "I am going out," he said. "Keep as much as possible out of the churches. They spread the contagion. The magistrates wished to close them, but the superstitious people would not hear of it. I will make inquiries, and if any of the religious or any one else has heard your friend's name, I will send you word. I may not return." Shortly after he was gone, the crowd thronging in one direction before Inglesant's window caused him to rise and follow. He came to one of the slopes of the hill of Santo Martino, above the city. Here a crowd, composed of every class, from a noble down to the lowest lazzaroni, were engaged in the clear morning light in building a small house. Some were making bricks, some drawing along stones, some carrying timber. A nun had dreamed that were a hermitage erected for her order, the plague would cease, and the people set to work with desperate earnestness to finish the building. By the way side up the ascent were set empty barrels, into which the wealthier citizens dropped gold and jewels to assist the work. As Inglesant was standing by, watching the work, he was accosted by a dignified, highly bred old gentleman in a velvet coat and Venus lace, who seemed less absorbed in the general panic than the rest. "This is a strange sight," he said. "What a tyranny of the Spaniards was not able to do, the plague has done. When the Spaniard was storming the gates, the gentlemen of the Borgo Santa Maria and the Lazzaroni fought each other in the streets, and the gentlemen avowed that they preferred any degree of foreign tyranny to acknowledging or associating with the common people. With this deadly enemy not only at the gates, but in the very midst of us, gentlemen and Lazzaroni toiled together without a thought of suspicion or contempt. The plague has made us all equal. I perceive that you are a stranger. May I ask what has brought you into this ill-fated city at such a time?" "I am in search of my relation, Il Cavalier di Gardino," replied Inglesant. "Do you know such a name?" "It seems familiar to me," replied the old gentleman. "Have you a reason to suppose that he is in Naples?" Inglesant said that he had. "The persons most likely to give you information would be the signori, the officers of the galleys. They would doubtless be acquainted with the cavalier before the plague became so violent, and would know, at any rate, whether it was his intention to leave Naples or not. The galleys lie, as you know, moored together there in the bay, and many other ships lie near them, upon which persons have taken refuge who believe that the plague cannot touch them on the water, an expectation in which, I believe, many have been fatally deceived." Inglesant thanked the gentleman, and inquired how it was that he remained so calm and unconcerned amidst the general consternation. "I am too old for the plague," he replied. "Nothing can touch me but death itself. I am also," he continued with a peculiar smile, "the fortunate possessor of a true piece of the Holy Cross, so that, you see, I am doubly safe. Inglesant went at once to the harbour, musing on the way on these last words, and wondering whether they were spoken in good faith or irony. The scenes on the street seemed more terrible even than on the preceding day. The slaves were engaged here and there in removing the bodies, but the task was far beyond their strength. Cries of pain and terror were heard on all sides, and every now and then a maddened wretch would throw himself from a window, or would rush, naked perhaps, from a house, and, stumbling and leaping over the corpses and the dying, like the demoniac among the tombs, would fling himself in desperation into the water of the harbour, or over the walls into the moats. One of these maniacs, passing close to Inglesant, attempted to embrace a passer-by, who coolly ran him through the body with his sword, the bystanders applauding the act. In the harbour corpses were floating, which a few slaves in boats were feebly attempting to drag together with hooks. They escaped their efforts, and rose and sank with a ghastly resemblance to life. Upon the quay, Inglesant fortunately found the physician, Signor Morrow, who was himself going on board the galleys to endeavour to procure the loan of more slaves. He offered to take Inglesant with him. As they went, the physician told him he had not discovered any trace of the cavalier, but what was very curious, he said, many other persons appeared to be engaged in the same search. It might be that all these people were in fact by one multiplied by the forgetfulness and by the excited imaginations of those from whom Signor Morrow had obtained his information. But if those persons were to be believed, monks, friars, physicians, soldiers, and even ladies were engaged in this singular search in a city where all ties of friendship were forgotten, for a man whom no one knew. As they shot over the silent water, and by the shadowy hulks of ships lying idle and untended, with the cry of the city of the dead behind them and the floating corpses around, Inglesant listened to the physician as a man listens in a dream. Long shadows stretched across the harbour, which sparkled beneath the rays of the newly risen sun. A sudden swoon stole over Inglesant's spirits, through which the voice of the physician sounded distant and faint. He gave himself up for lost, yet he felt a kind of dim expectation that something was about to happen which these unknown inquirers foretold. The galleys lay moored near together, with several other ships of large size in company. Signor Morrow climbed to the quarter-deck of the largest galley on which the commodore was, and Inglesant followed him, still hardly knowing what he did. The oars were shipped, but the slaves were chained to their benches, as though the galleys were at sea. They were singing and playing at cards. Upon the quarter-deck, pointing to the long files of slaves, were two loaded howitzers, behind each of which stood a gunner with a lighted match. Soldiers, heavily armed, and with long whips, paraded the raised gangway or passage which ran the whole length of the ship between the rows of benches upon which the slaves were placed. The officers were mostly on the quarter-deck. They looked pale and excited, though it was singular that few or no cases of the plague had occurred among the slaves who remained on board. The decks were washed with vinegar, and the galleys and slaves were much cleaner than usual. The physician stated his request to the commander, who ordered 10 slaves from every galley to be sent on shore. Some were wanted to act as bakers, some as butchers, most of the artisans in the city having fled or perished. A boatswain was ordered to make the selection. He chose 1 or 2, and then called upon the rest to volunteer. Inglesant was standing by him on the gangway, looking down the files of slaves. There were men of every age, of every rank, and almost of every country. As the boatswain gave the word, every hand was held up. To all these men death was welcome at the end of 2 or 3 days' change of life, abundance of food, and comparative freedom. The boatswain selected 10 by chance. Signor Morrow inquired among the officers concerning the cavalier, but could obtain no positive information. Most had heard the name. Some professed to have known him intimately, all united in saying he had left Naples. Inglesant and the physician visited 2 or 3 other galleys, but with no greater success. They returned on shore as the heat was becoming intense. The churches were crowded, and the Holy Sacrament was exhibited every few moments. The physician refused to enter any of them. Then Inglesant determined to try the hospitals again. He went to the Santa Casa degli Incurabili, which the day before he had not been able to approach for the dying and the dead. The slaves had worked hard all night, and hundreds of corpses had been removed and buried in a vast trench without the wall of the hospital. Inglesant passed through many of the rooms and spoke to several of the religious persons who were tending to the sick, but could learn nothing of the object of his search. At last one of the monks conducted him into the strange room called the Anticamera de Morti, to which, in more orderly times, the patients whose cases were hopeless were removed. There, at the last extremity of life, before they were hurried into the great pit outside the walls, lay the plague-stricken, some unconscious, yet with fearful throes and gasps awaiting their release, some in an agony of pain and death, crying upon God and the saints. Kneeling by the bedsides were several monks, but at the farther end of the room, bending over a sick man, was a figure in a friar's gown that made Inglesant stop suddenly, and his heart beat quicker as he caught his companion's arm. "Who is that friar, father?" he said. "The one at the end, bending over the bed." "Ah, that," said the priest, "that is Father Gracia of the Capuchins, a very holy man, and devoted to mortification and good works. He is blind, though he moves about so cleverly. He says that, too, within the last few years, his life was passed in every species of sin, and he relates that he was solemnly given over to the vengeance of the blessed Gesu by his mortal enemy, the minion of a cardinal, and that the Lord has afflicted him with untold sorrows and sufferings to bring him to himself and to a life of holy mortification and charity, which he leads unceasingly, night and day. He is but now come in hither, knowing that the sick man by whose bed he is dying of the plague in its most fearful form, man whom none willingly will approach. Mostly he is in the vilest dens of the city, wrecking with pestilence, where to go, to all save him, is certain death. His holiness and the Lord's will keep him, so that the plague cannot touch him. Ah, he is coming this way." It was true. The friar had suddenly started from his recumbent position, conscious that the man before him was no more. At the same moment, his mind, released from the attention which had riveted it before, seemed to become aware of a presence in the chamber of death, which was of the intensest interest. He came down the passage in the center of the room with an eager, unfaltering step, as though able to see, and coming to within a few feet of the 2 men, he stopped and looked towards them with an excited glance, as though he saw their faces. Inglesant was embarrassed, and hesitated whether to recognize him or not. At last, pitying the look in the blind man's face, he said, "This holy father is not unknown to me, though I know not that he would desire to meet me again. I am the minion of a cardinal of whom you spoke." The friar stretched out his hands before him with an eager, delighted gesture. "I knew it," he said. "I felt your presence long before you spoke. It signifies little whether I am glad to find you or no. It is part of the Lord's purpose that we should meet." "This is a strange and sanctified meeting," said the priest, "in the room of death, and by the beds of the dying. Doubtless you have much to say that can be said to yourselves alone." "I cannot stay," said the friar wildly. "I came in here but for a moment, for this wretched man who is gone to his account needed one as wretched and as wicked as himself. But they are dying now in the streets and alleys, calling upon the God whom they know not. They need the vilest sinner to whom the Lord has been gracious to kneel by their side. They need the vilest sinner. Therefore, I must go." He stopped for a moment. Then he said more calmly, "Meet me in Santa Charia, behind the altar, by the tomb of the wise king, this evening at sunset. By that time, though the need will be as pressing, yet the frail body will need a little rest, and I will speak with you for an hour. Fail not to come. You will learn how your sword was the sword, and your breath was the breath of the Lord." "I will surely be there," said Inglesant. The friar departed, leaving the priest and Inglesant alone. They went out into the garden of the hospital, a plot of ground planted with fruit trees, and with vines trailing over the high stone walls. Walking up and down in the shade, with the intense blue of the sky overhead, one might for a time forget the carnival of death that was crowding every street and lane around. Inglesant inquired of his companion more particularly concerning the friar. "He is a very holy man," said the priest with a significant gesture, "but he is not right in his head. His sufferings have touched his brain. He believes that he has seen the Lord in a vision, and not only so, but that all Rome was likewise a witness of the miracle. It is a wonderful story, which doubtless he wishes to relate to you this evening." End of section 53. Read by Elijah Fisher.